You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
Hey, what's going on, Los Angeles? Welcome to the LA Football Show here on the LA Football Network, live on the mightier 1090 ESPN Radio. This is your Rams House edition of the show, all things Los Angeles Rams football, as the Rams take on the Las Vegas Raiders this Saturday in their second preseason game. Excited to talk about joint practices, 2 days with the Raiders in Thousand Oaks, and then obviously we'll preview the game and talk about our matchups that we're most excited for. So joining me as always, my co-host, the Madman, Jamal Manny. What's up, my brother? How we doing?
Doing well, Rye. Great to be here as always and chop it up with you. It's so fun now that we get to talk about actual games and implications on the field. So always a pleasure. I can't believe it. We're just a couple weeks here and summer is behind us and we're in the fall. How time flies.
Oh, crazy. I love the fall. I cannot wait for the fall. Unfortunately, LA fall doesn't really cool down until like November, but it still feels a little different. You start making chilly. Football's on TV, so can't wait. So I wish we were in person today recording, but this one we'll do it remote. It's all good. We got plenty of weeks and plenty of games to be in the lounge, so we'll be back there soon. Show, as always, brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag today. Use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. Gets you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. For those degenerates out there, you can bet on the preseason. Yes, you can. I wouldn't advise it, but there is options out there. You can have some fun and maybe make that preseason game a little more enjoyable, especially if the Rams fall behind early like they did last week against the Chargers. Maybe some live betting is in your future. So betonline.ag, promo code BELIEVE. Tell the guys at the LA Football Network sent you. Jamal, today wrapped up the second day of joint practices with the Raiders. 2 full days, healthy competition. Coaches have been saying for years now that they get a lot more out of these joint practices than they do in the actual preseason game. I think that's mainly because the starters actually play in these joint practices and the preseason games they don't. But I thought there was some good, notes. I think heavy rotation on the offensive line. We saw Logan Bress get a lot of reps at right tackle. So we can get into some things. I don't know, from your research, from what I'll toss it to you if you have any kind of observations that you found interesting or little nuggets that you want to dive into. But if not, I can give an outline, but I'll toss it to you first.
No, Ryan, I mean, I think there's some interesting pieces here of how the Rams kind of built upon the week before in terms of the opener with the Chargers. You mentioned Logan Bruss. I thought he did some really nice things in that game last week. And so it's great to see that he continues to sort of build upon that. I think it's interesting as well that Aaron Donald kind of came out and said, hey, I'm not where I need to be, which I think is a really great sort of barometer and measuring stick. I think, going up against the Raiders offensive line and kind of going up against, first-rate starters here, I think he's sort of assessing where he needs to be and kind of ramp things up there. And then obviously just, the chippiness that sort of comes with some of these joint practices. I remember same time last year, we were talking about some of the chippiness with Donald in particular and some of the Raiders. So it's funny how kind of history repeats itself, but excited to get into the minutia with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, the one takeaway I think that I keep hearing from the beat writers there, from the press conferences, is there just seems like there's a lot more excitement and juice this go around in preseason and training camp, whatever you want to call it, versus last year. I think last year there was still the leftover juice of excitement from the seasons past, obviously the Super Bowl win, but it carried over, and I mean, everyone calls it the hangover, whatever you want to call it, but it was just like remnants of that juice kind of trying to spill forward to push forward for the new season. And it just obviously never came to fruition, where this feels like a brand new mindset, new juice, new competition, new excitement. And I think that's really healthy for this team. I think, because of where this roster is and all the young guys, we've talked about it extensively. And, they talked about it a lot in the week 1 against the Chargers, just, the lack of really veteran leadership, maybe not leadership, but the lack of high-end veterans outside of the big 3 on this team. And then obviously you have Havenstein and, Ernest Jones. And after that, it's a lot of young guys. So that's obviously going to bring an element of excitement and competition, just because those guys want it. That's first time in the league or very early on in their careers. But I think just the mindset and culture of even at the top of Sean McVay, even at maybe Les Snead, is that this is a new beginning. And now we're forgetting that, not forgetting, but we're leaving that Super Bowl year behind and looking now towards the next Super Bowl, and we have to build it yet again. So I think that's my one big observation, is just the juice.
I love it, Ryan. I love the terminology of the juice there, and I could completely agree with you. I think last year there was. I'm always reminded of what Mike Krzyzewski used to say, the great Duke coach, where, after a national championship, people would always ask him, how does it feel to be defending national champion and you're defending your crown? He said, I want to do away with that language right off the bat. We're not defending anything. We're trying to win it again the following year. And as much as you try and have that mindset, very hard for defending champions to come in that following year, not feel like they're already kind of on the defensive of having to sort of protect what is already theirs. I think there's an obligation, there's pressure, there's exhaustion. And I think this team felt all of that last year, and they were an older team. And I think they had all kind of come together to, the whole all-in mantra, to be able to sort of put something together. They were able to do that, and there's the sigh of relief that takes place. And furthermore, when you have a veteran group, the inclination is to kind of bring it back, ride it out one more year with veteran guys. That energy is not going to be there from day one. They have to pace and they have to peak at the right time. Now you're in a situation where, look, the most famous person in LA the last few weeks has been Taylor Swift. And so I feel like I got to use a Taylor Swift analogy here of this is now a new era. The Super Bowl was definitely the past era now for the Rams after this past season. Now they're starting from scratch yet again, kind of at the bottom of the mountain to go to the top of the mountain yet again. And I think having it with these young guys, many of whom weren't on that team, there's really sort of a freshness to your point. Everything is new again. Everything is exciting again. Everyone's learning again. Everyone's young again. So I think that's the energy that you and I are feeling in these early days of camp.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. And it's exciting. And that's why I think, maybe we're too optimistic on where this team go, but I think it's just because there is optimism, at least in what they're building. And it may not translate to 8 or 9 wins like we think, but I think it's the building blocks for a bright future. So,
yeah, Ryan, I think, I don't know if it's necessarily fair to call you and I optimistic about the season. I think we're taking a very real look at how much parity there is in the NFL and how oftentimes the difference between a 4 or 5 win team and an 8-9 win team is coaching. And when you look at who is the coaching staff of this team when it comes to Sean McVay and Raheem Morris, there's a lot of confidence there that they're not going to shoot themselves in the foot over the course of the season. Then when you couple the fact that this is a weak division where there's questions at quarterback with all of the other teams, and then you sort of factor in that you got a bunch of young and hungry guys, many of whom were very successful in college, many of whom came with a lot of expectations in other places and are trying to sort of rebuild their careers. And you balance that with veteran leadership, I think you have the makings to have a very solid season. I don't think you and I are sitting up here and saying this is going to be a 14-3 team that's going to go to the Super Bowl. No, not at all. But this is definitely a team that if the chips fall right and the young guys develop at the rate we believe they will, or maybe even a little bit quicker, this is a team that's 8 or 9 wins, threatening to get into the playoffs and really putting a scare into the division. And so I don't see that as sort of a hot take or something that's overly optimistic. I think that's just sort of the nature of the NFL and where we are.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we've been saying. So 100%. So let's talk quickly some little tidbits, and then we'll get into a little preseason matchup. So I wanted off the jump, let's go positive. And Sean McVay has came out and said, my daughter's just like slamming into the door. And so if anyone hears that, that's just, she's okay. She's just like running her bike into my door. He came out today and said, was asked like, who's been like the bright spot of camp so far? And his answer was Bryson Hopkins. And, I think that is it's good. It's interesting. I said last week that I saw him as a potential cut candidate just because you have Tyler Higbee is obviously your starter. You traded Jalen Ramsey for, the tight end, and you also drafted a tight end. Plus, you have other depth pieces, and Bryson Hopkins kind of had to, unfortunately, shift his play style a couple times in his short young career. So I thought maybe he'd be the odd man out. And we've seen a lot, Jamal, not necessarily just from McVay, but coaches in general will come out and say, this guy's having a great camp, and then they still end up getting cut just because that's how the numbers work out. So that could happen, but it is good to hear that he's having a great camp. And it seems like it's trending, like he could find himself, carve him out a big role in this team, bigger than it's been his whole career. But I think at minimum, that tells you that he'll end up on a different team if he doesn't make it with the Rams. And if anything, that's his coach kind of building him up and saying like, hey, if we don't have room for you, I'm going to make sure you end up on another roster somewhere by, praising you and having your back. So that was just my first note. Bryson Hopkins, who don't hear a lot about kind of since he was drafted, and good to hear he's having a good camp.
Absolutely, Ryan. And I think I think the new energy and the opportunity of playing time, I think everything feels so wide open. Yeah, on both sides of the ball. I mean,
Yep.
The offense maybe slightly less because you've got Kupp and you've got Higbee, but outside of that, especially from a receiving perspective, the slots are open, the opportunities are open here, and I think there's a new energy. And I think it's great to hear guys that have been on this team the last couple of years that have maybe struggled to find their way are making a jump and are ready to sort of contribute. I think it speaks to guys that have sort of bought in to the Sean McVay philosophy, guys that believe that even he has a new energy. And I think that, there's an interplay there. If you don't feel like your coach is completely invested, completely energetic, it becomes kind of challenging for you to bring your best effort. And so I think the fact that is taking place is a very encouraging sign.
Yeah, definitely. So other note, and this maybe a negative, but I think it's more just growing pains, which we've expected. There was a lot of conversation about how the Raiders defensive line really kind of dominated the Rams offensive line. And, Brian Allen was on a rest day, but I don't think we thought he was really probably going to start anyway. I think we've kind of figured Coleman Shelton will take over that center role. Rob Havenstein got kind of nicked up here and there. Logan Bruss got nicked up here and there, playing at that right tackle spot. Joe Noteboom was basically just doing individuals these last 2 days for an undisclosed reason. And from what we've seen, he probably isn't going to start anyway. So, concerning to you at all that they got kind of dominated manhandler, or more of just, we knew they were going to be growing pains. They're trying to find their right starting five. And, we still have 2 weeks of preseason to get it figured out.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more of the latter, Ryan. I think that the Raiders are a very quality front four. And so, you're going
Crosby's
up against, absolutely. Crosby is an absolute beast. And so you're going up against an upper echelon front four here in the NFL. And then secondly, I think this offensive line is not going to overwhelm you with talent, but what is taking place right now is you're trying to find the right spots for these guys. And so you're trying to see, what is this collective unit of five? How are they going to mesh to be the most effective they can be? I think there's been huge steps from last season's debacle, but I think it's going to take some time and some real gameplay. And so I think the more reps they get in the preseason, the more they kind of get into the season first 3-4 weeks, then I think this group is going to have their sea legs under them. Until then, I think we're going to see continuous growing pains. I think what the key element here is, you want to be very process oriented with the offensive line, and you want to see week over week improvement and kind of game over game, scrimmage over scrimmage improvement. And you're really modeling kind of that growth rate more than any one performance on any one given day. And so if they start stagnating, let's say this week against the Raiders in game competition, we don't see what we need to from an improvement standpoint. The next 2 games in preseason, that growth rate becomes stagnant, then I would start getting really concerned. But this was the point of departure of this offensive line, was very raw, very new. A lot of guys were trying to find themselves. So it doesn't surprise me that they struggled pretty significantly. I think now it's all about improvement from here.
So we can kind of spill now still observations from these Tuesdays into kind of matchups for the preseason game. And so sticking with the offensive line, at the time of this recording Thursday, I'm sure McVay maybe will come out on Friday, maybe say some guys that aren't going to suit up. So, if we say someone they don't shoot us. We recorded it before it was announced. But I'm really interested, Jamal, to see who on the offensive line will play on Saturday.
Yeah.
I think it's obvious Havenstein won't. as he's the stalwart. But honestly, outside of him, I think they need to play everyone because they need to find that continuity. And I know McVay has had this stance since he's been here. We've talked about it. He kind of started the trend of not playing starters in preseason. But when you look back to last year, yes, there were a lot of injuries. But in that week 1 matchup against Buffalo, when the offensive line got absolutely manhandled by that defensive line, granted a very good defensive line, but they were not ready. And they had some new guys, some shuffling around on that offensive line. And had they maybe played some preseason snaps and got some continuity, they were still less talented overmatched than what Buffalo had, but they may have been able to, perform a little better. So I really think the Rams need to take these next 2 preseason games and play guys that they anticipate to start just because they need reps. And when you have young guys that have never started, and even Tremaine Ankram's never started, Coleman Shelton hasn't been like the true starting center. Obviously the rookie hasn't started. And then you have Alaric Jackson, probably is going to be your starting tackle who played some guard and swing tackle last year, but now is the face of that side. You got to get continuity there. So I don't know, you think, Jamal, but I think the offensive line, they need to play everyone, maybe outside of Havenstein on Saturday.
Oh, I completely agree with you, Ryan, for a couple of reasons. One is they need the reps, to your point, and they need to build the experience. But number 2 is you're also managing confidence, because what happened last year in that opener, I mean, it was the most humiliating game a defending Super Bowl champion has ever had. I mean, let's not mince any words there. And that set the tone for the season in a very downward spiral type of way. We thought because they were veterans, because they were the defending champions, that they would sort of find themselves out of it. This is a very different situation. If these young guys don't get the reps and they just absolutely get smashed in the mouth week 1, how long is it going to take to rebuild these guys' confidence? I mean, you could see these guys go in a funk from week 1 to week 5, and you're 1-4 out of the gate, and there's really nothing to talk about after that. So it's not just about getting the experience and getting the reps, but it's also about brick by brick kind of building confidence, where this thing that isn't a house of cards week 1 and it all comes crashing down. So McVay, again, has to change his approach. I think he will. This is a different Rams team. This is more of a blue-collar underdog team. He has, outside of his first year, it's been pretty star-studded. They've been favored to at least win the division most years that he's been the coach, favored to sort of go deep in the playoffs. That's not the feeling here. So I think he has to sort of change his approach. He's not trying to manage a team, a championship-level team right now. He's trying to rebuild really good habits and kind of build a culture and a discipline from ground up.
Yeah, and you need those reps to stay healthy, and
for sure.
Sometimes, I think we're seeing that trend of not playing starters is kind of reverting back to what it used to be. Because remember, it used to be back in the day, there was 4 preseason games. First game, starters would play 2 series. Second game, they'd play like a quarter. Third game, they'd play 3 quarters, and in the fourth game, they wouldn't play at all. And then we became where half the league, they don't play a single snap. And now I think we're reverting back to where, they're going to get some snaps every game, except for maybe the Rams. But so a few other points. Tutu Atwell, by all accounts, has looked great in camp. And so refreshing to hear. We've talked a lot about make or break season for Tutu, not just as a Ram, but probably in his NFL career. And from all accounts, I don't know if he's necessarily looks bigger, but he's playing bigger. He knows the playbook. He's in the right spots. He's making catches. His speed was never a question, but now just using it to his advantage and to his ability, and looked good in both joint practices. We didn't see him in week 1. Probably not going to see him again in week 2. Maybe, fingers crossed. I kind of hope we do, but at the same time, just happy to hear, Jamal, that it seems like he's really made that leap from year 2 to year 3 now.
He's a wild card here, Ryan, in terms of where this season can go. I mean, again, you and I have kind of talked about this. He sort of brings a dimension that the other receivers don't really have in terms of the blow the top off speed. And it sounds like he's understanding now, not just everything can't be a go route, and you're not really just sort of a track star out there. You have to sort of pace in terms of how you break your routes, how you run your routes, how you set up a defender. And it sounds like this is the year now where he's understanding what it means to be a complete football player. And so it's going to be very exciting to see how this shakes out. Truthfully, Ryan, I would have wished that he played a little bit more, last week and even this week. I'd love to just sort of see him with a Stetson Bennett out there, especially with sort of Bennett's arm to sort of see a deep home run connection there, just to kind of get a feel for it. Would have been really exciting. But if McVay wants to kind of keep it close to the vest and do a surprise attack week one, we have to sort of defer to his resume and him knowing best. But, let's see it. We got to see it to believe it now. It's one thing to sort of dominate in practice. Great to see. Great that he's got that momentum, but it's got to translate now into real games.
Yeah, it's still an uphill battle, but it's good that there's improvement, because last year there was no improvement. Really, no. It was kind of like, there's not really any change. And so now hearing that is very refreshing to hear. So on radio, we got to take a break. So we'll be back bottom of the hour previewing the Rams game on radio. If you want to hear more Rams talk, head to our podcast at LAFBnetwork.com, because on podcast tomorrow, I want to hit a few more points. So radio, be right back after the break. All right, so a couple things I wanted to get to before we ran out of time. We didn't get a chance to recap the game last week, and so I want to talk about two players. We can touch on their performance, but then also I want to talk about them now matching up against the Raiders. And let's start. You said it, so let's just jump into it. Stetson Bennett. Sean McVay at this point hasn't announced who's going to start. Last week, Brett Rippon started. I'd be curious to see if he swaps that or keeps it the same. Preseason is tough because very different scenarios, right? You're playing with different players and you're going up against different level defenders. So it's hard to really put stock in Brett Rippon was dreadful. Stetson Bennett was way better because of all those different intangibles, but surface level, Stetson Bennett did look much better than Brett Rippon. And so, I'm not going to overreact. It's preseason, but we'll just say, Jamal, it was good to see his game mentality from college seems to definitely have spilled over out of the NFL, and right, wrong, and different in terms of competition. He got the team going. It looked like there was more juice when he was out there. He led them on a touchdown his first drive. Granted, there was 2 dropped interceptions, but hey, that's football. You'll take it, baby. He still capitalized and scored a touchdown. So your quick thoughts on Bennett's first performance.
Yeah, Ryan, I think there was a lot of good. I think his athleticism translated to the next level, in air quotes, kind of the next level with this being a preseason game. But I was very impressed with his ability to sort of move around in the pocket. And I was wildly impressed with some of the throws he was able to make. There was kind of that deep sideline ball on third down. I think it was to Nakua, if I'm not mistaken, or Tyler Johnson. But that was just an absolute dime. That was sort of an all-pro throw that he made. There was sort of there's a spring to his arm and his ability to kind of push the ball down the field. I think he looks really comfortable out there, and I think the movement is terrific. So I think there's a lot to like in terms of that piece. I think the negative for me was he took a lot of sacks and deep sacks. These weren't just sort of losses of 4 or 5. These were losses of 16 and 19. And so he's going to really kind of need to learn some pocket presence and when to kind of give up on the play. I think that's sort of the piece there. He held onto the ball a little bit too long, looking to sort of push the ball. So I think that's kind of where that decision-making has to go to the next level. I think he got a little bit lucky, especially he was a little bit too upright from time to time in the shotgun for me. He was very college-esque, where you're sort of looking at that first slant route, in college. And when it's Georgia and you got 60 yards of space, you can sort of drop it in there. But I think that what I want to see from him is in this next week is when to sort of give up on the play and live to fight another day and start going through his progressions a little bit more. He was kind of a one-hit wonder in a lot of ways in terms of reads. But outside of that, the athleticism, the arm strength is there. There's a lot to build from with Stetson Bennett. That's the beauty. The things that he's struggling with right now are things that are coachable, are teachable, that will come with experience. And that's what is very encouraging, that he's going to be able to make that next step. And I think that if he plays his cards right, I think it's very clear that he's going to be QB2 here, if not right away at the start of the season, at some point in the season, because his ceiling is just higher.
Yeah, totally agree. They're very, very different style quarterbacks, but his performance in a way kind of reminded me of year 1 and year 2 DTR from UCLA, where it's like you see some great athleticism, some great splash plays, some wow moments, and then you see a 20-yard sack of just like thinking you're more athletic than the other guys in front of you. So overall, I think all the goods outweigh the bads. All the bads were very coachable. You could see the arm talent, as you mentioned a lot. You could see the athleticism. So there's a lot of excitement. I mean, the offense definitely looked a lot more exciting and fun when he was out there. So that was good.
It looked dynamic, Ryan. It looked more threatening, frankly. I mean, I think no one was afraid of the offense when he wasn't out there. And so there was a dynamism that he brought for sure.
So adding on to that then, and you can just be really quick with this, but like, so what do you want to see now in his second start against this Raiders team that has a good front 7 or at least a front 4, but has a very weak secondary? I mean, the Raiders might on paper have one of the worst secondaries like in all of football. So how do you want to see him kind of exploit that with his arms and legs?
I think, Ryan, for me, it's understanding that, number one, and sort of adjusting his game to the style of the defense. So I think for me, it's all about getting the ball out quickly and being able to potentially leverage eye movement, pump fakes, sort of body positioning a little bit to kind of get the secondary to cheat and know that you have a lot of room over the top to be able to make some really big plays. So it's not just standing back there and kind of dancing around or holding the ball, but it's being very intentional with your movement very quickly to create the separation down the field to be able to make big plays, knowing that you don't have the same level of time. So that nuance I would love to see. Again, also kind of looking at a couple of different options in terms of going through kind of read 1, read 2, and then maybe give up on the play or, sort of take off and slide. And then kind of the third piece is really just avoid the big play and try and be more conscious of being, to protect the ball a little bit more. Those are kind of the 3 things that I'm looking for him in terms of the jump and just sort of overall comfort at the line of scrimmage, overall command of the huddle, and those types of things. And I think those are all very much in the cards given the momentum that he just had last week.
Absolutely. So looking forward to that. So, okay, 2 more players, Jamal, I want to get to, and we'll wrap up this Rams segment. I want to go back to the receiver room real quick. And Puka Nacua is the name everyone's talking about, everyone loves. He's already the fan favorite. So I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on him. He's looked really good. I think he's had a really good camp. He had obviously the touchdown and looked really good in his first performance. I think he's going to be a very viable player in this offense in week 1, week 2, week 3. So I think there's a lot of good to say about Puka Nacua. I just think a lot of it's already been said. So I want to focus on someone else. And a guy that really impressed me, you mentioned him just a little bit ago, is Tyler Johnson. Yeah. And Tyler Johnson, I loved at University of Minnesota. I thought he had the ability to be a star. He was getting drafted by Tampa, which, Tom Brady was there at the time. It's like, okay, that could be a fit, but we also know in Tom Brady's career, right, wrong, and different, like he's going to favor his vets that he knows. He's not going to necessarily have a number 1 target as a rookie or a second year. And so Tyler Johnson kind of fell down the depth chart, wasn't able to kind of find his holding. And this has, I said it, I think a week or 2 ago, not necessarily about Tyler Johnson, but just about the Rams in general. This has a very, and again, not the same style of play necessarily, but just in terms of collegiate player to NFL arc, has a very Robert Woods feel to it, where Woods was a great collegiate athlete at USC, went to Buffalo, could never really find his footing with Buffalo, ends up with the Rams, and then just explodes and becomes a top receiver in the NFL. I'm not saying Tyler Johnson is going to be a top receiver in the NFL, but in that short performance we saw, granted it second half against the third string, whatever you want to call their defense they're playing, but was poised, looked like he knew the offense, was Stetson Bennett's favorite target, made big time catches on third down. And so I think I'm very excited about the project that this guy is, or the projection that this guy is, and how he could really revitalize his career in LA. Because again, that's a lot what Sean McVay does. Everyone talks about the star power they trade for, but they also trade for and sign castaways that have a lot of talent, but didn't make it in their team. They come to the Rams and it's like a shelter, right? And they just refurbish and reform these guys into great players. And so I think Tyler Johnson has a chance to really be kind of the next Robert Woods, if you will, of the Rams.
Ryan, it's such a great point. I mean, when you look at it, he's bigger than I remember him at Tampa Bay. He's gotten bigger, and that sort of catch radius and his ability to just kind of get to his spot, It's almost like a great post player in the NBA. He was able to get to his spot fairly comfortably and then still find a way to have some giddy up. I mean, there was that one third down play where, he was sort of flat footed. He turns around and goes upfield for 17, 18 yards down the right sideline. And, you didn't think he had that kind of gear as well. So the combination of size and speed, I'll be honest with you. Now, granted, it's to your point against third string competition. We need to see it against, top competition. But when you just look at the tool set of Tyler Johnson, when you look at sort of size, speed, his hands are really soft, his ability to get open, his package, Ryan, is probably the second best package on the Rams. I think his overall package might be better than Van Jefferson, as crazy as that sounds when you factor in the size, the speed, and the hands. So I think there's a real opportunity here for Tyler Johnson to sort of move up the depth chart, but also make a really big impression with the first and second team in real meaningful play. Look, where did the Rams really struggle last year amidst all of their issues? Part of the problem was also Stafford on third down would always be in Kupp mode, and it just made this offense very predictable. Yeah. Van Jefferson's a great receiver, but I don't know if his frame is as sort of durable to be that kind of every down, third down type of reliable target. He's going to get his catches. He's going to make his plays. He's very smooth with the ball, great route runner. But a Tyler Johnson could really find a home here as being that very viable second option on third down for even a guy like Matt Stafford. So I couldn't agree with you more, Ryan. I want to see was that just sort of a one-hit wonder, or does this package kind of scale and does he kind of continue to improve week over week? I was sort of stunned to see him. I mean, he just looked every bit the part. And you sort of wondered, man, who is this guy? Puka Nacua, obviously he had his moments. Obviously he had the touchdown. Everyone was really excited. But Tyler Johnson was the best-looking receiver on that field.
Yeah, totally. So I'm fired up. Loved him, like I said, come out of the college. So I think he's found his home here in LA under the bright lights. So Jamal, one more group I want to talk about. If you want any more, you obviously just throw them out there. But I want to talk about the edge as a whole, because this is obviously probably the most concerning group on this entire team, just because they really don't have any starting players. I mean, they're basically starting all new guys. Michael Hoyt would be the most tenured starter, and he was moved to edge last year late in the season without any edge experience. They drafted Byron Jones, who I think we have now assessed is going to have a very important role in this defense. Is going to be the starter, and they will lean on him a lot to basically provide all rush presence outside of Aaron Donald. So he's going to have a major role, and by all means has looked good so far. But I want to talk about the depth a little bit, because I think, again, we don't want to put too much stock into it, but it's worth at least kind of dissecting a little bit. Late in the game, you get Daniel Hardy, you get Khair Thomas, you get some of these other guys, and they were able to get 2 sacks on the Chargers late in the game. And again, it's not like anything we're writing home about, but I think it was good to see at least them get their legs under them a little bit, able to get some pressure and do something. Because I'm not saying I'm more confident about the unit, but I just think there's some improvement there, at least in guys that we really haven't seen play the position at all, just because they have no reps.
Yeah, no, Ryan, as you were talking, I was smirking a little bit because I was reminded of the line that Chandler said, on Friends, where he's talking to Rachel and Rachel likes Ross at this point, but Ross is dating, Julie at the time. And so, and Chandler says, if there's any consolation, he came to this conclusion all by himself. And she's like, how is that a silver lining? And he's like, you really got to want to see it, And so it's, when you were describing the defensive line of the Rams, it felt like we really want to try and see something here because granted, there were a couple of nice sacks there late in the game, but I think we all remember what happened late in that game in terms of their inability to set the edge in any way. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Dotson,
2 big rushing touchdowns.
Dotson looked like Barry Sanders out there, and he wasn't even touched. The cumulative total of 80 yards on those 2 runs, and he wasn't touched on either one. So a lot of work in progress there. I think there's some building blocks, but this is going to be a concern moving forward And I think their evolution, look, the line play is really where this is going to be, made or broken, as is with every team. But I think defensive line, offensive line here in particular with the Rams, they have the biggest room to grow. And let's see where it goes. But I think we're kind of starting at a bottom level here. And so let's see if we can kind of make those growth spurts week over week heading into the season.
Yeah, that's going to be what I'm watching. I mean, obviously there's in fun storylines about the secondary, and we didn't even get to talk about really Trey Tomlinson, who looked good in the preseason game and also looked good in these joint practices, and others have looked good. But I'm going to be watching the edge, and if they can set the edge, if the Raiders run all over them again, just with bouncing outside, then I think the Rams are going to have to go out and sign some vet for a vet minimum, just bring someone else in, just because. I mean, if you can't set the edge, you have no chance to win a football game.
It's going to be tough.
Zero chance.
Yeah.
Very tough. So we will see. But kickoff on Saturday, Rams, Raiders. Excited to see the growth of this team. We'll have we'll be covering the game, obviously, during the game, and we'll have recaps for you all next week. So everyone enjoy the game. Go Rams. For Jamal Madney, I'm Ryan Dowd. We'll talk to you all next week.
You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.